Hello.
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 What's up, Kevin? You were asking a question?
Which document is it that has like the structure for what the hell we're talking about today?
Regrettable sentences.
Okay. So I'm not really sure what the topic is today, but have we changed thoughts on things?
Nah, man.
I think we'll just figure that part out as we go.
Just follow Jason's
lead. I'll just follow your lead. Yeah.
I mean, like the way that we discussed doing this previously was that it was going to be like essentially if someone asked us what we thought as a podcast, we would refer them to these major themes and be like, yeah, in this episode we discussed this, that, whatever. And then of course we got a reading list that sort of corresponds to that down below it. And so this would basically be like the discussion of our like collective ideology in all of its divergences and convergences.
Gotcha. Well, I think it's important to emphasize the emergent reality that I think you guys have been involved for 7 years in untethering your ideology, unknotting it. And so it is no longer fixed.
Yeah.
Which is kind of scary, but also scary to think of something as being fixed in the way that we did. And so that's part of the answer to whatever this question is of what our ideology is. It's like looking open, open to change.
Right. And also just this, since we have 6 years behind us, sometimes it's worth just, it's kind of like a best of, like this will catch you up to speed,
Yeah.
Right.
What's up, Kevin?
I'm doing the shooter gun.
Oh,
like go.
You too. You too, Kevin.
Kevin's a lone gunman now. That's his ideology.
Hello. And stop laughing so I can record. Hello, and welcome to the Regrettable Century. It's everyone today, all the dudes, and we are here to discuss a bunch of stuff. For real. Everything. We're discussing everything. We're criticizing all that exists today.
Ruthlessly.
No, but I mean, the working title for this episode is The Regrettable Ideology. Because, like, we whenever we're asked questions about, hey, what do you guys think about this or that? Or have you guys ever done an episode on this? The answer is generally yes. And it's episode number whatever from season whatever. And here's a link. And that's basically what this episode is. This episode is a link.
This episode is the Attack of the Killer A's of our best of.
Yes.
Oh, that was an Anthrax.
That's a reference to Anthrax's collection of B-sides called Attack of the Killer Bees. Yeah. That's a reference that, like, you knew that no one was going to get and made it anyway. Good job, Jason.
Well, I figured that you would.
Yes, I did.
That was for you, Chris.
So, I mean, like, honestly, we as a podcast, when we started, we were in the process of sort of exercising sectarianism from our from our respective ideologies, collective ideology, respective and collective ideology and ideologies. And we've all changed a lot since then. I guess Ben wasn't here 6 years ago or 7 years ago when we started. But
no, I was out I was in the wilderness.
In the wilderness. You hadn't yet come home. We started off Trotskyist, pretty Trotskyist still, even though we were tending post-Trotskyist, and have all changed a whole hell of a lot since then. And that's what this is. This is like a highlighting of some of the major themes that we've grappled with through the past 7 years or so. I guess this is year 7 starting now, so the past 6 years.
Well, I, for one, am still ready to die on the hill of the degenerated workers' state. So.
I'm honestly, that's something that I came around to.
Yeah, if anything, I've at the level of like theory, I've become more of an orthotrot.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, honestly, I never quit really adhering to the idea of the degenerated worker state. But as a good democratic centralist, I just never talked about it, even when I was a Cliffite.
See, and I was very, very convinced. I spent an enormous amount of time on the subject, and I was really, really convinced. And it took a lot of conscious revisiting of everything to come back around to my kind of soft, tanky position. But I still have a lot of I still have retained a lot of the frailty of the older ideas too.
Well, I mean, like, we would be called probably tankies by our former comrades in the ISO, but like we still harbor criticisms that Stalinists would think are unacceptable to harbor.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, I honestly, I mean, I side with, in as much as it matters, which is not at all. I think Trotsky was probably on the right side of a lot of debates that were going on in the 1930s and 40s. But at the same time, I think Trotskyism was an utter failure and albatross around the neck of the workers' movement in the United States.
Yep.
Are we tanky? Are we tanky trots?
No, we're not Marxites. We're not Workers' World Party or what's the other one?
PSL.
PSL. There we go. Yeah, the pumpkin spice latte.
I mean, honestly, that's kind of what episode is like. When I wrote here, like do we still more or less think the things that we have thought? That's a major question. Like, I don't mean like individually, like, in particular, like every single episode, do we think the same things in the episode? But like when we started, I think at least I had a very different conception of what I was trying to do. Trying to, I don't know, salvage the parts of the left that were workable and useful. And now I kind of don't think that there is
any.
Right.
Yeah.
I kind of don't think of the left as my project.
Or a thing even?
Or a thing at all even.
Right. The workers' movement is always a thing because the workers' movement is the one side of the class struggle. Now, whether or not it's organized and like has any teeth is an entirely different story. But there's always the embryo of the workers' movement anywhere where workers are organizing against their bosses. So like in the labor movement, even in, the discontent felt on the job is the embryo of workers' struggle, right?
Yeah.
And whether or not that's actually like harnessed is another story. But so the workers' struggle is independent of the left. And I think that in this country, they're completely divergent.
Mm-hmm. Right. And at one point, I had maintained this delusion that a project, it was a major project of our time, was to remarry, to try to bring together the left and the workers' movement again. I no longer think such things. I no longer think that there is a left that has anything to contribute to a workers' movement which is barely existent. Right. Even though I still maintain that I'm in favor of a communism. I'm still influenced by the writings of Karl Marx and whatever, and Lenin and so on. But I just kind of, when I went back and listened to some of our older episodes, I feel like what I hear is just like a lot of naivete, like just a lot of hopefulness, which is funny because I'm more hopeful now than I was then.
What's funny then is that we were really like leaning into dialectical pessimism. Yeah. And now it's sort of just like has been fully digested and it's now part of the show and we don't lean into it as much, but we are infinitely more of both we're infinitely more dialectical and pessimistic than we were before.
You're more pessimistic than when you started. You had hope then. You had naive hope.
Right, because
exactly.
for one, I have a much better grasp of what it means to think dialectically.
Sure.
And I am also way, way more pessimistic about what can be done with the coloring of the American left. So I'm more pessimistic about that project, which I think at this point is it's not to be saved. But I'm more hopeful at the same time about the prospects for socialism. You know?
I think it's not to be saved as a project that is totalizing in and of itself. Is that Wolfman?
Yeah, Wolfman. I let him out because he was meowing, and guess what? Guess, just guess.
I feel like I don't
meowing because he's so happy that you let him out.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I can't think of a way to incorporate Wolfman into what I was going to say, but
well, you're
Wolfman. What I was going to say, Wolfman, was
he's going back out now.
Well, Wolfman, what I was trying to say is what was I trying to say? Basically, I think that the people that are involved in the left project are not. I don't think they're so disposable as you, Jason, but I don't think their project can be put into effect in and of themselves. They have to leave themselves and meet real people outside of the left, and I think where that happens is populism, which is not necessarily left or right, but is a whole mishmash, and that is where politics can happen, to my mind now.
Sure. I mean, like if you look at the Russian Revolution, it was the harnessing of populist anger, which channeled into class revolution, that became the revolution. It wasn't like the Bolsheviks enacted the program that successfully recruited a critical mass of people that would allow them to topple the government. You know, it was just the insertion of Bolshevik politics into a broadly populist anger about the war and food prices and lack thereof, and etc. I mean, that's sort of always been what we should have thought, rather than the ISO's sort of line of find the most liberal liberals and liberalize them even more into communists, and once we do that, we can start the Vanguard Party.
Well, and similarly,
I recall back in those days of being in the ISO, probably in the later days, whenever I would catch one of the higher ups would come through the area or something, I would try to ask the question quite pointedly, because I was very, I was a member and I believed in the project, even if I was really maybe had a foot out the door or something. But I would ask the question of, all right, well, our what we're doing right now is we're sort of organizing things to try to recruit people in the ones and twos. If we're really, really successful, we'll even have that ones and twos level of recruitment grow exponentially, algorithmically, and into the 5s and 10s and 20s, right?
Yeah.
If we continue to do that, then we'll be a few thousand people in, we'll be an organization of, maybe a couple dozen thousand people within 5 to 10 years or something like that. We're still a wildly marginal, tiny speck of an organization. If our goal is world revolution, or even just whatever, leading a revolution domestically or something like that, which would then subsequently have the hope of linking up to a world revolution, what are the medium point steps? What are the steps between where we currently stand and that other thing? And I never once got an answer to what are the steps between, recruiting in the ones and twos and revolution.
It's the underpants gnomes, Jason.
Well, right.
The question mark profit.
So
Profit.
So if I was to give my own answer to the question, like if the question was asked of me at the time, I would have said, and it would happen sometimes. I would have said something like, in February of 1917, there were only like a few thousand Bolsheviks, and then by October, there was like 25,000 or whatever, and then by the end of the Civil War, there's like, 1 million. So it was really like conditions, not what we do, but the conditions that would actually happen around us, that the events would they would be the real dialectics of history. So the point of conducting ourselves in that way at the time was just to be preparing. But it was really clear. It became really clear to me at some point that we weren't preparing for anything.
No,
right.
And
I have never met I've never met a self-identified revolutionary who I could, in a million years, imagine anyone outside of their little reading circles would ever respect or look up to or listen to, ever.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That's because also, like, you're not going to build something capable of revolution or anything by pitching revolution in a non-revolutionary moment. No one wants, like, people want stability. They want to be able to, like, take care of themselves, raise their families, have a good income. And you can't skip ahead. You can't say, oh, what we have to do is we have to make a revolution. Oh, okay. Right. Well, when's the meeting? There's just, I mean, I'm not talking against revolution, but
no, but being revolutionary is like being a surfer. You sit out there and you wait, and when the revolution comes, you ride the wave and you try to, like, do something with it. You don't make the wave; the waves happen. Being present to inject the human agency into the movement of history is what revolutionaries are for. Because, like, yeah, you can guide, your vehicle or whatever along the path of history to a certain end, but you don't get to direct the flow of history.
Right. And so a couple of things, like, made it really clear to me that we did not conduct ourselves in any way which prepared us for anything. Like, 2011, there was the Occupy moment.
Right.
And that was a moment where there were populist, broadly popular ideas. And we didn't care. We weren't involved in anything that would attract more than just the normal people that we would recruit at, like, immigrant rights demo. And then in 2014, Shama Sawant got elected to city council, which meant that there's at least some room for a different approach to the questions of power. And then the 515 showed that the questions of labor, questions of wages, and of organization of work were still the primary questions for socialists. And then by 2016, with Bernie Sanders and then with the DSA, it was, like, really clear. Like, okay, the ISO represents the old way of the sectarian, post-New Left, street protest left. So I don't want to be a part of that anymore. But then also, the DSA never really did much either. And I think that was whenever I became really interested in this concept of pessimism, because it was really clear, like, none of this that we have on offer is something to be optimistic about.
Right.
Just to clarify what I was saying earlier before you go, because I think we have to offer people more than being a revolutionary.
Sure.
The revolution, as we've oft noted, is not made by people who want to be revolutionaries, right? It's not an identity. It's not an identification. That is that's like a university garb that you put on when you're role playing. And we're not trying to recruit people to role play.
Well, right, like Lenin
be
said
fun,
that one must be as radical as reality itself.
Yeah.
But reality is not always radical enough to be revolutionary.
Sure.
It's quite often it's not.
Right. So I think that coming out of the Bernie moment, first of all, coming out of the ISO, coming out of the Bernie moment, grappling with the inefficacy of the DSA and the failed, like, the drastic rise in class consciousness that looked like was happening, and then the petering out of it in the wake of 2017, basically. And I guess, when did we start this podcast? Like 2019? Was it 2019 or 2018?
It was in October of 2018.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, after 2017 happened and the Bernie moment fizzled out, et cetera, whatever. And then we started being able to put voice to some feelings that we were having, like some pessimistic leanings that we were having. And we kind of thought that there's a virtue to a revolutionary / dialectical pessimism, because there's this like sort of Lucy holding the football for Charlie Brown moment that we were going through over and over again as American leftists, where we put our faith in the sect, we put our faith in tailing the Democrats, we put our faith in whatever else. Whatever it was just, a recipe for stagnation and continued long-term decay of the revolutionary project, the workers' movement, or whatever. So adopting a pessimism that allows us to just have no faith in the institutions that exist now, and no faith in like the powers and principalities as they exist now, it will allow us to see through it and actually have a faith that can imagine a better world at some point. So I think that is something that we've articulated better more recently than we did at the beginning of our stint into dialectical pessimism. But I don't think our adherence to that principle of dialectical pessimism has changed at all.
No. I think it's become more genuine, more real,
entrenched.
More entrenched. Well, and like, so when we're trying to assert this as kind of our underlying philosophy,
right?
We did this episode called Pessimism of the Intellect, Pessimism of the Will. But then during that same season, we had a listener write in and say, I think you might have meant it, like maybe rhetorically that's useful, but you might have meant it more like what I've adopted, which is that he said you might have meant it more like a Gramsci when he said pessimism of the intellect, but optimism of the will.
Which we conceded that, yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
That is what we actually mean. We were just being snarky or pithy or something.
I think, well, I'll just speak for me. I just don't think I really thought about it. I shouldn't really think about the implications. So when we did this episode called The Proper Amount of Bumming People Out, that's what it was about basically allowing ourselves to be taken to task by this listener and be like, okay, fine, this is actually what we really mean. And that's, I mean, hell, Gramsci was writing in 100 years ago, more or less.
Yeah.
And he still gifted us with our underlying philosophy. That's still the primary way that we should think about things. I think he was entirely correct.
Sure.
Well, how does that shape our approach to ensuing events? Like, I'm ready to admit what it means with great powers and with the state and with capital. What does it mean with labor? What does it mean with progressive forces? I've mentioned to you, like, it often feels like almost impossible to like we look for things to sort of support from a distance, whether it's Yemeni fighters or whatever. Like, but all of it seems like we're just kind of watching. I don't know. We're just watching things that we have no part in.
Well, right. So that's why I have this section called Rethinking What It Means to Be Revolutionary. Because, so like Kevin is very involved in a really particular, really specific, and it seems very fruitful community building project, which I think is a really, when we think about our discussions about neoliberalism and what that has meant for the obliteration of everything that is collective, everything that gives anybody meaning. I think maybe Kevin is really onto something, and I think we should all learn something from what it means to be intentionally building community again. That's part of my argument for Catholicism, but it's also part of my argument for, like, if you're going to be a socialist, if you're going to join a socialist project of some kind, that really should be at the core. It's even maybe the most primary thing right now. It's just because we don't have any, we don't have the basic collective society that we had even 50 years ago.
Right. I mean, I think that the lack of civic institutions is definitely an enormous problem, because the capture of civic institutions is necessary for the revolutionary success. And the fact that we don't even have those, we don't have like places of congregation, collective congregation at all.
That episode about the right to the city, changing the city to change ourselves, is about trying to reassert the demand and the necessity for collective institutions at every level, even if you don't have the opportunities presently to organize your workplace, your neighborhood, your building. There's successive layers in society. We are individuals and atomized so thoroughly that any amount of restitching together, any amount of the city, any amount of social life is a part of the revolutionary project. And if being a socialist is going to mean anything in the 21st century, it's definitely going to mean, at least partly, it's going to mean that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what it's not going to mean is, in our anti-fascism of fools episode, this tilting at windmills, protesting against any and every manifestation of anything which we could imagine to be a greater threat than it actually is. Instead, if we just dedicated our time and our mental energy to building something positive, something uplifting, something that people would want to join, something that people would find meaning in and want to build themselves, then we would be, at least we would be doing something. We'd at least have something to point to and something to show and say, hey, being a socialist means this. Wouldn't you want that too? Come be a socialist with us, And I'm kind of going all over the place, but
I'm just thinking, even if thinking of that anti-fascism of fools episode, if it was a different reality and there was an encroaching threat of actual fascism, their way, the people that are loudest about it, that would not be effective either.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it's not enticing. It's not. There's zero invitation, really. There's zero project. It's just kind of yelling in the darkness about they're needing to someone turn the lights on. It's just there's nothing for regular folks to get involved in.
That's what I always said about anti-fascism is it's being anti-fascist is a byproduct of being a socialist. It's not like a separate position that you take and organize around. It's like, as a socialist, if there's a rising threat of fascism, we counter that rising threat of fascism with socialist politics, and not with like hunting through people's tweets from 9 years ago to see if maybe they accidentally forgot to delete something that exposes them as crypto-fash,
Yeah.
I mean, that was when we did this episode in the second season. We did this. We would prefer not to, against the politics of catharsis. That's what it was really about. It's like, instead of this routine of like, event happens, we get outraged, we propagandize around how we're outraged, get everyone together, and make a statement, then we write a statement about it, we write an article, we do teach-in, then we wait for the next event, and invariably there will be another outrageous event. And it feels good. It feels like, okay, well, yeah, we can, on a weekly basis, we can live out our catharsis. but it doesn't do anything.
It didn't feel good to me, man. That's why I left it behind. It felt disappointing.
Yes.
It felt demoralizing. Because I was a true believer, you know. I bought into the idea that if we do this and do it hard enough and do it well enough, this will create change. This will lead to the creation of change in some manner or another. Yeah. And I actually want the world to change.
Right.
I don't just want to piss in the wind. And because of that, the fact of the world not changing ever, or only changing for the worse, that didn't feel good. That felt like just a big letdown.
Well, I think that's the difference between you and a lot of our former comrades, is that like they were LARPing something that they thought would be fun. You know, they got the hat that the Lenin wore, and they wore the T-shirt that said the slogan, and they yelled in the face of the cops and called the people fascist, and it made them feel like alive, to be like involved in movements for liberation. And really what it was, I mean, it's what we always talked about it. It's jouissance, right?
Yes.
And it's just this like addiction that we all had to playing the revolutionary, but like banging your head against the wall and nothing ever changing, when you actually believe that doing what you're doing is supposed to change things, is incredibly demoralizing. But for those people who were just LARPing, LARPing the new left while they were in college, it was fine and it was fun, and they can look back on it with, have good memories about it, instead of being like me or you guys, incredibly feeling duped, for one, because I know I feel duped, and feeling like we just wasted a lot of time. Like I could have probably been a lot more successful of a person if I wasn't devoting all of my spare time to, hyperactivism.
As true believers, you were invested in politics being more than theater, and it turns out it never was.
No,
it was always theater, and that's beyond disappointing. That's like gut, it hits you in the gut, you know.
Yeah, it's a knife in the gut. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's what I think. When so I would compare like when we talked about it, we did like an episode called "The Death of the Left." We can contrast that with like the legacy of William Morris, which is an episode that we did in season 5 that Kevin led. It was based on a talk that he did. That's based on a talk that he gave at the Cascadian Midsummer in this milieu of this community building project. And so we can compare them very directly. And the left that we come from, that we lament, and that honestly our younger listeners have no familiarity with, and it's both for good and bad, good and bad things we could say about that. But we can compare like the legacy of William Morris with like the legacy of our legacy so far, and it's night and day. Mm-hmm. There's something tangible, something to not just say, what am I trying to say? There's like a contribution made to history that is known around the world, even by people who are not consciously pro-socialism.
Right.
And that's so much more meaningful than any of the countless thousands of wasted hours that people like us and people like the generation before us, that they have spent yelling about whatever they were upset about and expecting somehow that to magically change something. I don't even know. I don't even really know, like with some distance, how I could look back on it. It's like, oh, that was what we were hoping to accomplish. It's kind of wild. It's kind of bewildering.
I think for me, I've been able to be a part of things that were not organized by a bunch of incompetent weirdos. I've seen things being organized by people who hold their levels, their hands on levers of power. I've seen stuff put on by them and organized by them, and much of the time, oftentimes, has these same sort of weird characteristics of, people screw things up and things are awkward and strange, and people don't know what they're doing, and I don't know, whatever else, all these things that you see among leftist organizations, but it's embedded in a system of real power, or it's embedded in some sort of social process that yields something.
Yeah.
That I think that, the organizing of microsects and whatever else have never been intended to do. They have never been intended to be embedded in some sort of social process that results in meaningful power, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. It's intended to, ultimately, at the end of the day, these things are intended to sell some books, or, pay get salaries of the party leaders or whatever, the sect leaders. And that's about it. It's hard to say what it is exactly that would constitute, the right version of this. But I think one thing that I would take from Hegel on the point is that the process of coming to know truth or the real is inherently a process that involves error and
right,
being corrected by the real. When you think you come to learn something and you think you've grasped the truth, and then the real asserts itself against this truth that you've come to know, and you come to know truth through the process of encountering error. But that necessarily means being corrected by the error,
that
not
confrontation with the
leaning
moment of truth
harder into the error.
Yes, exactly. That confrontation with the moment of truth is so critically important, but only if you can do so with humility and recognize that, I didn't know. I was wrong. Now I know better.
Which seems like most self-professed Marxists that I know are really, really allergic to.
Yep.
Is admitting that their analysis was incorrect.
Yeah. That's actually been a really big part of our project on this podcast, is making sense of our past, revisiting the various confrontations with the moment of truth, and being willing to be corrected. And even if only after the fact, we have done some really good episodes about this, our past, the Stillborn Utopia is a really good one. That's one of a series of episodes we did about the legacy of the American Revolution and what it means to think about being a citizen of the American Republic, and how that leads directly into the tragedy of American socialism, which is a really good series, I think, because that is we get to look at the longue durée of the American socialist project and specific moments. I guess there are two of them, right? There was the tragedy of American socialism, and then part two was the farce of American socialism. And then we're in whatever is even worse than that, the third iteration.
Man, whoever names our episodes does a good job.
Yeah, if we ever meet who that person is, we should congratulate them.
Yeah.
But also, we did this one called "The Enlightenment is Dead, Long Live the Enlightenment," and it's about how the overcorrection towards we had this scientific revolution in thinking, and that has led to an explosion of possibility in all directions. And it's also led to take a cue from Adorno, we could say that it's also led to the Holocaust. And it's led us to revisit Romanticism and be much more, be less linear, less hopeful about progress. It's actually a big part of at least my engagement with Hegel in some kind of a serious way. Serious enough to be a little bit embarrassed about how in some of the older episodes I would say, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, like I've just had it wrong. But it's only by revisiting these assumptions about our past that we realize, oh, we've been doing it wrong. Let's try something else. So that's a big part of our project, which I think is ongoing, but that's not over at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a flaw in the model of the microsect and an accompanying flaw in its horizon or its vision of itself. But what do you think I often thought that it's in that period, that neoliberal sort of valley of the left in America, at least, was the mission was just to carry the torch to a period in which there would be a left that could ascend once again, which I think it very imperfectly did. It was kind of an impossible task. The other thing that we're kind of forgetting is how the political economy affected everything and made it just decimated labor in a way that made the left totally hollow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this wasn't like the product of poor strategy, like on the left. It was like a much deeper macro reality that we were born into. And so I have some sympathy for the people that carried the torch.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
Because the criticism, I render is like, you're doing it wrong, but then necessarily the response to that is, well, then what do you think we should be doing instead? And I guess that's kind of what you're pointing out here. I don't know. I don't know what the right thing to have done was. I do know what some, at least within my lifetime, what some of the wrong things to have done were, and that's what I did in my youth, my younger radical years. I think I think there's a couple of things I would say. One is that I would say that the New Left was a mistake from the top to the bottom in every way. It did everything that it rejected about the old left and everything that it injected into it to become the New Left was a degeneration, a defect, something that made it worse and less useful, less productive, less able to accomplish anything in the world. So one, I would just say the whole New Left was a mistake, top to bottom. Two, I think pointing to the fact that we exist in a world of where we're born into a world of disintegrating social institutions, especially proletarian ones, and we suffer from that, defect in the world, and so that it leaves us with little else to do ourselves. Well, I think that means that we can't look to the organization of sects that were done by our grandfathers and say, well, let's do that because they did that and they were successful in it. Instead, we have to do something different. And I think maybe something that's worth giving a shot at is being the seeds that are the catalysts of reorganizing institutions, social institutions for the proletariat, for the working class, for working class people. That if we are the nodes of organizing, social institutions for people to be able to actually convene again, that would place us as the left, as leftists, in pretty important and influential positions to be able to carry things into what they could possibly be next.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's kind of what this willingness to abandon our older trajectories section is meant to be. Is like, it's not about it's about coming to terms with what has been and recognizing that what needs to be is not a rehash. It's not just we need to do the right things again. We need to do the CP program in the 1930s, the CIO, and the SEAL drive. We don't need to redo 1917. We don't need to redo the Second International. We don't need to redo.
That's good because we can't.
Well, right. Luckily, we can't. But also, like, we have behind us a lot of failures, a lot of glorious failures, but failures nonetheless. And so that's part of what what we called our 1 + 1 is 3, the poverty of third campism. Or when the boys figure out what Marxist industry is correct, or the question on popular frontism, those are all discussions about what has come before us, what lessons can be learned about what has come before us, not so that we can know what to do when those things happen again, but really, at least for me, it's about kind of putting those away, like kind of closing the turning to the next chapter. And Kevin, what you said is like there's this recognition, I think, that needs to be at the forefront of what we do, is that the next chapter, we don't know what it's going to be yet because we're writing it. We're not waiting for it to be written. We're writing it right now, and we don't know what it's going to be. And if we're looking to old chapters, we're never going to get there. We're never going to start, let alone finish this chapter.
I think that's a big difference between our reading to understand history now as opposed to when we read in study groups as members of the ISO, because back then it was always looking for parallels in history so that we can know when the jumping off point is going to be, like, oh, this is just like the 1930s in slow motion, right? Oh, this is just like the period. This is a pre-revolutionary period like the 1905. This is, it's like trying to look for previous moments in history that we could possibly recreate. And,
right.
Thus structuring our organizations the way that we thought the Bolsheviks did, even though I think that the way that we structure our organizations is not the way the Bolsheviks structured them at all. And it was actually a lot less democratic.
Even our older episodes, even in this podcast, even in our older episodes of discussing our current projects and discussing historical lessons, that was still at least partially, maybe unconsciously, but partially informed by this idea. I'm going to just that we're going to find the right way to do it this next time. I just think that's something we have to abandon completely. We have to recognize that that's just not how it happens. It's not how the world works. That's not how history is made.
Yeah. I don't want people to read Lenin so that they can, memorize his, prophecies and like reenact his instructions on how to do things. But rather, I want people to read Lenin and be inspired by someone who saw that he is actually capable of doing very big things.
Right.
He is capable of engaging in the world in a manner that radically changed history. He understood that he was in such a position, and he did that. And he did it in a way that no one before had done. No one had done it. He changed the world. He did big things. Big things are possible to do if we want to do them. So what I want people to take from studying figures like Lenin is, I want you to set your eyes on being successful at something that if you are successful at it, that means that you will have changed the world.
Yeah.
I think part of the hell that we live in is that we live in a world of the left whose grasp exceeds its reach. And that is despite the fact that it supposes itself to be revolutionary and utopian and whatever else. I think the actual reach of the actually existing left is to do and to say things that make other people see them as being super radical. And once they've accomplished that, they're satisfied. They're done. They can pack their bags and go home. I would much rather a left that existed be constituted in people who couldn't give a shit less about being perceived as radical, but who actually want to change the world.
Yeah.
In very real, very material ways.
Yeah.
And
That's
what?
yeah.
And what about like completely reorienting our definition of utopia along the lines of the kingdom of God is within you, not some estranged world that I'm divorced from that is forever in the future that we can imagine collectively but never get to. What if it's something I build in myself with you and yourself now, beginning now?
I mean, I think if that was where we wanted to, where we stopped, then I would say that would be not going far enough. But it's definitely where we need to start and where we need to spend some time, rather than just, it's everything's after the revolution. After the revolution, that's when we can start talking about the world we want to see, rather than we're building it right now. And the revolution is about that ruptural moment in which the new world, which has been gestating, gets birthed, fully formed. It's when it finally steps onto the stage of history. But if it's not inculcated in our hearts and minds before, then it's never going to happen. We're never going to reach that horizon if we're not sailing toward it. That's why the next section is called the major obstacles / challenges that we face. So, I had listed a couple of episodes like happiness industry socialism, which is just about basically it's the opposite of our dialectical pessimism or pessimism of the intellect. And then also like the perennial whipping boy of our podcast, who says you're not making liberals socialists, you're making socialists more liberal. And then also everything is recuperated, which I think is a dramatically useful and even still just kind of under theorized. That's something I would like to return to at some point, just talking about recuperation as a very, very real part of the American radical psychological makeup. And yet it's not so conscious and not so clear as to even be recognized as ever having happened. And then also, I guess, the burden of ecological disaster is one of the challenges we face. I don't know if we have a lot of time to relearn all the old lessons and then teach new ones.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the pinch, right?
Yeah, but like, I think that we don't have any choice but to like be patient and organize from the ground up, even if we don't actually have time to do it, because what else are we going to do?
Well, I guess that's a good point.
Well, I mean, Luigi Mangione seems to have done something.
So I said you're lone gunman now.
Yeah.
Well, we have 360 million people in this country. We don't need 360 million Mangionis. We just need like
a handful more would be nice.
Yeah.
It's a truly significant event. And it doesn't matter. You can immediately say, okay, murdering someone on the street is immoral. And everyone, like, once you say that, it's like, okay, well, that's not even the point. Everyone knows that's wrong.
It's not the point, yeah.
Everyone knows that's wrong. Okay. The significance is that everyone's dad and mom is being, what did they call it? Murder by policy or...
right. I mean, this is the way that we talk about riots. It's the same sort of thing. Like, no, a riot isn't like a virtuous act. It's just an explosion of class anger. It's like weather. It's the result of atmospheric forces that force a rupture. They're instances that are neither good nor bad. They simply are. And as revolutionaries, you orient yourselves around acts like that. Right. But, however, like, I'm going to go ahead and use my Aquinas here and argue that I think Luigi Mangione is engaged in just war.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know. There are arguments to be had about the moral, like if he actually thought that killing this man was going to save thousands of lives, then there's an argument for it being a moral act. But I think that's sort of beside the point. That's like an academic argument. For us in this instance right now, it doesn't fucking matter. It matters is that it happened because it's boiling over of anger at something that is very demonstrably unjust.
I would argue that it matters more. The public response matters more than the actual killing.
Right. You talked about, Ben, the neglect and how that amounts to murder anyways. And I just would like to quote Mark Twain here and say, it's from a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. He says, "There were two reigns of terror, if we would but remember it and consider it. The one wrought murder in hot passion, the other in heartless cold blood. The one lasted mere months, the other had lasted 1,000 years. The one inflicted death upon 10,000 persons, the other upon 100 millions. But our shudders are all for the horrors of that minor terror, that momentary terror, so to speak. Whereas what is the horror of swift death by the axe compared with a lifelong death from hunger, cold, insult, cruelty, or heartbreak? What is swift death by lightning compared with slow death by fire at the stake? A city cemetery could contain the coffins filled by that brief terror, which we have all been so diligently taught to shiver at and mourn over. But all of France could hardly contain the coffins filled by the older and real terror, that unspeakably bitter and awful terror, which none of us have been taught to see in its vastness or pity as it deserves."
Yeah, so good.
I could never be a Catholic reactionary. The way that those guys wistfully long for the return of monarchies, and the right-wing integralists among them are idealize the Habsburg empires. I said, you can miss me with all that aristocratic lionization, and one absolute net positive of the Enlightenment is the desacralization of the aristocracy. I think liberalism did good work there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was liberalism had its moment in history, and it was a very long one. It's past us now. So when we say that you're not making liberals socialists, you're making socialists more liberal. What we're saying is that you are trying to hold back history, or you're drawing back toward something which is past its expiration date.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Which is by definition reactionary, is it not?
It is.
Well, Balzac was an utter reactionary, but he was able to see all sides and basically embody their class positions. This is why Marx loved him so much.
Yeah. So I also kind of want to talk about our deep skepticism and our hostility toward techno solutions. And that's been a recurring theme on our podcast.
Yeah.
Going back to the first season when we talked about the future being canceled, but all the way through partially automated regular communism, and our episode called Socialism Without Sacrifice, and really no technical innovations under capitalism. This is a recurring theme for us.
Yes.
And it's
not
one
quite
of the things
Luddites, but
but pretty damn close. Pretty damn close.
Yeah.
Because not only do I think the Luddites were sympathetic, their Luddites were more correct in their time than the average socialist is in our time right now.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there is a certain amount of technology that I become utterly a Luddite in the presence of, I mean, when we're looking at the addition of AI to everything and the massive environmental destruction environmentally destructive potential that AI has, I immediately become a Luddite. I'm like, all right, cool. If that's what computers are going to be used for, we need to smash all of our fucking computers,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And then looking at like the enormous environmental cost that switching over to electric cars would have. I'm a fucking Luddite when it comes to electric cars.
And that's not even taking into account the surveillance capacity of a digitized society.
Right.
That's just the environmental concerns.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, like, I would say if you're not at least somewhat of a Luddite, then you don't understand the problem, the dire circumstances that we're facing.
Well, and also, like, you kind of fundamentally misunderstand the capacity for the further development of technology. Like, in our Future Has Been Canceled episode, I mean, I think it was this episode where one of the things that we talked about was the David Graeber episode, the David Graeber article on flying cars. I forget what it's called. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
One good David Graeber article.
Yeah, it is the one good David Graeber article. But it's like that has
really
worked its way into our general. That's part of our repertoire now. Just this skepticism about the possibility for much further to go, much more dramatic leaps forward in what is technologically even possible.
What were you saying, Kevin?
I was just going to say, Graeber really is actually a lot better than he presents himself as being. If it's really, he's at his worst when he's talking about his area of expertise, which is anthropology, because he's just so committed. Like, at a very young age, he committed himself to the project of anti-materialism and showing that human societies are not determined by economic structures or material conditions. Rather, we can all simply choose to organize ourselves in one way or another spontaneously if we just will ourselves into it, or whatever it is, whatever his thing is.
I mean, that's what I thought too.
I know, but when he's not like talking about anthropology or applying this analysis to, like, you know, society or whatever, he's great. He's lucid. He is very insightful. He's just absolutely fantastic. It's just when he's trying to prove to you that economics do not determine economic structures do not determine human society.
Well, so I kind of feel like we covered the years in review, like when we covered our past. But the next section is called Looking Ahead, and I kind of feel like there's some. It's funny because these are all the later seasons.
Yeah,
there are some episodes which kind of point toward this kind of transition in our thinking. Starting with, I think, the first one that we did with Ben, called Marxism and Dialogue with Christianity, which is just broadening our philosophical grounding. It's like, well, there's more to the understanding the world than just what we have already read and all the ways we have done it wrong. And then that is the foundation for our Dialectic of Apotheosis with the Lunacharsky and the God Builders, and then Bathing in the Warm Stream, which really, I think, we're really like, which again, the warm stream of Marxism is something that we've always talked about, but Bathing in the Warm Stream, and then we really kind of admit, or we recognize that that's where we are now. And then our real grouchy old man hours is just me and Chris talking about what's left of the left. And the spoiler alert here is that there isn't much of what's left of the left.
For sure. I think that a good thing to have included in here just flows very easily from the thing we were last talking about, and that would be the dialectic of degrowth.
Yeah.
You know, and I would just like to double down on how we are a pro degrowth podcast. I
actually had listed that. I just forgot to mention it. The dialectic of degrowth is a really good episode too.
People hated that episode.
Marxists hate degrowth.
Yeah. I don't know how. To me, it's just an utter impossibility to imagine life on Earth continuing to exist without a certain level of degrowth, especially in the first world. You know, but anyway,
I mean, that is kind of that's part of what's so appealing about the more utopian, more ethical socialisms of the warm stream, and part of why my return to faith matches so well with my philosophical outlook, my political outlook in life, because they're not separate things which I'm trying to graft together. They're the same thing, because I have already, just speaking for myself anyways, I've already long since abandoned the techno solutions, the scientism, the blind faith in progress that is the norm on the American left, and that I think is, well, it's detestable, but it's also just it's fantastical. It's not real. I'm much more interested in what is real, and so all the stuff about the warm stream, that's actually is looking ahead, even if it is in fact, even if it sounds like it's looking backwards. It's looking backwards to look ahead, in a what you might call a very dialectical way,
in a Benjaminian style.
Yeah,
walking backwards into the future.
Yeah,
I like that.
Moonwalking into the future.
What about Kevin's third worldism? Isn't that's also part of looking ahead?
Third world is degrowthism.
I do think that we should do an episode about that one day.
Yeah.
I think that Kevin should lead an episode about what this actually means, beyond the flippant getting a rise out of casual observers. Like, let's actually talk about what is really meant by third worldism, and how I think that what you're interested in, what motivates you, is very different from Monkey Smashes Heaven or any of the other. Do you know what I mean? Do you remember this? The weird third worldist?
I do. I remember.
Okay. American labor unions are the enemy of the global proletariat. That's kind of
MIM notes.
Yeah.
Dude, MIM notes. Remember the guy that used to hand out MIM notes in Austin in the early 2000s?
That guy looked like a wrestler, like a very third tier B-list celebrity wrestler.
He would be like a heel. If I remember correctly, he had like long hair and wore like the Fidel Castro cap and then like a leather vest.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
So he would be like a communist heel. You remember how there was the Iron Sheik, and he was like the bad Iranian in the 80s, and then this guy would be like the bad third worldist revolutionary.
Рабочие крестьяне не смогут прожить без нас. Без нас некому будет установить порядок, определить работу, труду. Без нас все развалится и государство распадется.